brief context. So I've been doing investment banking for the last 12 years, primarily focused in internet and digital media. A lot of folks think about that as a sector. We don't really think internet and digital media is really a sector. It's a core competency. And I'll go through a slide, at least how we think about the sector. I work across e-commerce, online marketing, web infrastructure, gaming, so a bunch of subsectors. And email is a core function of all those companies. Clients that I've worked with in the past include Amazon, Facebook, LinkedIn, Trulia, Living Social, and a bunch of others. So with that, what I'm going to do is I'll just spend maybe 3 to 5 minutes, and hopefully I'll keep it to 3 to 5 minutes, and give you my perspective on, our views, the lens that we see the world, and then I'll turn it over to these guys, and then we'll discuss a few topics as far as the email ecosystem is concerned. So we think about the sector as in a very, very basic form, as IP and IT are changing everything. If you think about IT nowadays, it's better, it's faster, it's cheaper, and it's really driving a monumental change across every company, every organization, every sector. And what it does is it creates new consumption patterns, new platforms, and new business models. And when you think about that, and you think about 65 trillion of global GDP, it's affecting every dollar within that GDP. And I'll throw out a data point for you guys. This number that you're looking up there, 65 trillion, there's a study that's done that shows 21% of that 65 trillion is being affected by the internet. And of course, mobile is a big part of that. So it's having a profound effect across every organization, every industry, and every geography. And it's important to think about that. Within that, we think about horizontal forces of disruption. And they include social, mobile, data, real-time, and cloud. And I'm sure you guys hear and see it every day. But those are really the basis of what's happening and leading the innovation and disruption across the sector. Communication is one of the most important mediums. And I think we're all aware they're changing and changing fast. And you can think about tweets and Facebook and video and YouTube. But if you just look at this chart and just see where email is compared to those, it's pretty astounding. And so the important thing over here is to think about how do you think about your communication medium, and how do you think about what are the new mediums out there, and how do you incorporate them into your strategy. It's still growing rapidly, and I know the slide says 9,000 emails annually. I feel like I get 9,000 emails in a month, so there's something wrong with that data point. But the point still remains, it's here. I know it's an interesting topic, and a lot of people think email is going to die. But it's going to be here. It's going to grow as these numbers suggest. And I think what's important is how do you really evolve and change with the new technologies and systems that we all live in. So what are the key themes that we want to discuss? And I've got probably 26 themes over here, and we can probably spend the next 6 hours discussing those. But there's 4 that really jumped out to me, and certainly these entrepreneurs will have a lot more to say, and those are big data. And I know there's a panel right after this on big data, so we'll touch a couple of things on that. Relevancy. Relevancy comes in many shapes and forms, and why that's important. How do you guys think about mobile? Mobile is an important medium. We see it in commerce. We see it in vertical marketplaces. We see it in gaming. But how does mobile really change email, or does not? And then social. So those are sort of the 4 topics. Let me just give you my 60-second views on those 4. Big data. Big data is probably one of the most often used terms, and probably one of the most misused terms out there. Big data was here 10 years ago, guys, and big data is here. The big difference now is the volume, variety, and velocity of data is just changing so fast, and that's why people talk about big data and has implications on email. Relevancy, as I said, comes in many shapes and forms, and I know, we'll touch upon content, which is an important part, but it could be analytics, could be segmentation, personalization, could be a bunch of other things, but it's very important to think about how that's evolving in this ecosystem. Here's an interesting data point on mobile. So recently we saw mobile has actually overtaken webmail and desktop as opens. And so why is that important? Certainly that data point points towards something that's interesting. And how do you guys think about mobile in this ecosystem? And then finally, social. There's way too much on this page over here, but the point is, you know, the variety of sources that are coming into the ecosystem are very, very important, and you have to consider them as your overall communication medium over here. And social is a big part of the world that we live in today, and it's going to be a part of where we think the world is going to go tomorrow. So with that said, why don't I turn it over to you guys, and maybe Robbie, you can kick it off and just give a quick background on yourself and your company, and then we'll just jump into the discussion.
Great, thank you. I'm the CEO and founder of Automated Insights. We're a Raleigh, North Carolina-based company. You might hear my accent come out. We fundamentally have automated the writing process, and so we can take data and turn it into hyper-relevant content. We've done this in a variety of spaces, most notably sports, finance, real estate, sales. But we've also worked with a number of brands to take their data about their customers, about their organization, about their products, and turn it into tailored emails that they can send out on a one-to-one basis. So you're no longer restricted to sending out a single email that maybe will be read by lots of people. You could send out a single email that will be read by one person, because each of those emails are tailored to that specific person's data each time it's sent.
Thanks, Robbie. I'm Levine. I'm one of the co-founders and CEO of FilterIt. We're based out of Chicago. So FilterIt is now a Chrome extension for Gmail, where we add rich icons to the inbox. And we've spent a lot of time thinking about email and user behavior from the consumer side, which is, we know that on the marketing side, we're going to try to think about the different segments and subject lines and times of day to send messages. But how do the consumers themselves want to organize and consume their content? And we've spent a lot of time with consumers, watching their behavior, thinking about what they do both on their desktop and mobile. And our solution really kind of centers around the idea of taking and organizing content into branded environments or into visual environments. So you think about your friends or your family or your marketers, and rather than just seeing a Groupon message come in or a Delta message come in, you have a Delta icon that works with the existing functionality of the Gmail client.
Hey everybody, I'm Quintero. I'm a co-founder of AdStack. At AdStack, we have a platform that allows you to serve dynamic content into the email in real time and essentially change the email after you sent it while it's in the inbox. We work primarily with e-commerce companies and retailers to increase the effectiveness of your CRM efforts by email, and also work with a large number of e-commerce companies who do acquisition in email, where we operate a marketplace of about 1,000 individually owned and operated email properties. Prior to AdStack, I was part of the early team at BloomSpot, which is probably the third largest daily deal site right now, where I led business intelligence, CRM, and user acquisition.
Hi, I'm Erik Severinghaus. I'm also based out of Chicago. Prior to SimpleRelevance, which I'm founder and CEO of, I was actually part of the co-founding team for an ESP called iContact. With SimpleRelevance, what we do is we try and take a lot of those sort of best practices that Toby was talking about and other folks talk about, things like personalization, dynamic content, segmentation, all these different elements, and make it incredibly simple for email marketers to drive these things into their email marketing campaigns. So what we see is over and over again, people want to be doing these things. They don't necessarily have time. Not everybody, unfortunately, has a staff of 22 people to run their email campaign. So we automate and make a lot of these sorts of best practices very, very simple in terms of execution.
Great. So I think you guys touched upon all of those 4 key themes. Why don't I start with you, Erik, on big data? So what is big data to you, and how does that really relate to email? You know, I threw out sort of volume, velocity, and variety, but just specifically as you think about SimpleRelevance, how does that really feed into your solution?
You know, we get tagged very much with the sort of big data moniker, and you know, it's obviously a hot spot right now. I love what you said earlier about the fact that big data was here 10 years ago, because it's absolutely true. You know, data analysis, data analytics, the tool sets have changed a little bit. You got things like Hadoop and various other analytics tools that allow you to analyze massive data sets more quickly. However, 90% of the insights that you're going to get, you don't necessarily need terabytes and exabytes of data where you're able to sort of clean and normalize your data and do basic analysis on it. I think the key element of big data comes in terms of that interface point between data analysis and making that data actionable. So, you can do analysis all day long, but at the end of the day, how do you turn that analysis into insight and then ultimately actions that create better conversions? I think that's the critical element of big data that a lot of us are really, trying to figure out how to crack that nut.
Now, so 2 points over here. I've heard this from large companies and small companies. You talk about terabytes of data, and most of them actually say, hey, we actually only use 1% of the data.
Right.
Right, and so it's good to hear that perspective. How do you go about, if you are a company or marketer, how do you think about that 1% and why, and is the other 99% just irrelevant, and so there's a big cost component to it?
I don't know that I think that it's irrelevant per se. The trick is it's sort of the classic Pareto principle of 80-20. 80% of your value, I don't know if it's in 1%, 80% of your value is in a very small segment of the data. And ultimately, if you can start doing a lot of the basic types of things, whether it's looking at the demographics of your audience, incorporating things like past behavior, whether that's retargeting over the web, whether it's retargeting in email, all these different kinds of things, where you're able to even start taking the basics of your customer data profile and then taking action on that consistently, that's where you really start driving results. And you see that over and over again. You don't necessarily need to go back 10 years into somebody's buying behavior in order to have a good idea of what they might be interested in. If you can figure out what they're clicking on over the last 30 to 60 days, augment that with maybe some demographic profiles or other things that don't change all that much, you can get to a pretty good idea of how to engage that person best.
Good. And so Dan, so a couple of things you talked about was real time and optimizing and changing emails. So from your perspective, how do you think about the different data sources, right? So let me just take a page out of the display world, right? There's a lot of innovation that's happening in display. There's RTB. There is, of course, the dynamic content that's coming in. So within the email world, and there's rich data ecosystems, right? So a Blue Sky and Xlate and those guys are doing. So what's happening in the email world that you're bringing to the solution, and how do you feed into these first and third party data sources to actually bring what you're trying to do here?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, when I was initially thinking about starting AdStack, I talked to a lot of investors who told me, you're in the wrong line of work, email is gonna die, it's gonna go out. And my thought was always, email's not gonna die, I don't think it's anywhere near being dead, it's just a little bit tired perhaps. And that's because email has lacked technologies considered fundamental and basic in many other advertising mediums, such as social and display. And I think all of us up here and many of us in the room are working very hard to make sure email has these same technologies and uses this same data in order to optimize our emails. And specifically, I think ESPs have gotten very good at using demographic, geographic, and behavioral data to serve truly personalized emails at send time. But there's some data it's still a bit of guesswork, right? Because you don't know the what, the when, and the where. You can't be certain when someone's going to open that email, where they'll open the email, and on what device. So we can use real-time data when that device is then opened to figure out, hey, so this user's on my list in San Francisco, but they're in Utah right now. So we want to make sure that we show that person a piece of content in the email that's relevant to them where they are, so we can still monetize that user. So one example of combining the geographic data that we have when we send and then combining that with real-time data when it's open. Another example might be using transaction history to serve a flash sale item that's limited quantity. And you want to send that email to a certain number of people on your list, and maybe that item sells out. And what you want to be able to do is whenever that person opens that email, you want to be able to ping your inventory and see if you have any of the item left, and then serve inventory that's actually still relevant. And with respect to sort of, again, the what, if you are a company that has a mobile application and you're seeing a lot of opens happen on mobile devices, you want to make sure you have a call to action in that email that's going to allow that person, whether they're on an iPad or an iPhone or an Android device, to click through to the relevant app store and make sure they can download that application. So I think what we're seeing is, again, email is maybe slowly and more quickly now coming up to date and seeing more and more of these technologies that have been considered to be basic in other mediums. And as they're being used, we're moving email from a medium where we're used to having to go through 100 emails to find 3 ones that are relevant to being more of that demanded and truly valued content that we want to go to the inbox and check and interact with.
Okay, so again, we've got 4 themes that we're going to discuss. So takeaways on big data, it's been here. it's still here. Probably more volume of it. It depends on how you really use that data and what's really effective. And then also, it was a great analogy you brought, the feeling is email's a little bit tired. And I brought in display and social, but there's elements of that people are modifying, and that's something that feeds into where email is. Okay, so let's move on to the next one, which is relevancy. And maybe, Robbie, I'll start with you. So you talked about content and automated content. And I brought up 4 or 5 things on relevancy, right? Could be content, context, personalization, segmentation, analytics. So it's a lot to throw out there. But let's just talk about content. And how do you think content's evolving within sort of the email inbox? And how do you think that's changing as we go forward?
Sure. So, when I think about email and email delivery, for me, it's ultimately about the message that you're communicating. You can spend a lot of time creating really nice and pretty templates that are used, but ultimately, if the message that you're communicating isn't relevant and interesting, your unsubscribe rates are going to be high. And so one of the things that we're able to provide is an ability to, again, take data and turn it into content that's on a one-to-one level. I think about the evolution of content over the last, 10 or so years. It started, and people still do this, where you have sort of mass messages. You craft a message and you send it out to thousands, if not millions of people. Over the last few years, hyperlocal's become more of a buzzword. Targeting has become more of an option, but still you're sending a more tailored message, but still to a fairly large audience. To me, the ideal is the next step, which is personalization, where you can take data and craft a message that's only relevant to one person in the whole world, but it's really relevant to them. And some of the work that we've done around personalized content has really shown that, especially the larger the brands, the more you can tailor the message and create something that sounds like you wrote it specifically for one person, that resonates extremely well with people, because they're so used to just getting inundated with all this generic content. The more personalized content you can get will really set you apart. And so for me, it's just kind of that one piece. And to get back to what Erik was saying about big data, there's all this data out here that's going unused. A big reason for that is you don't know how to use it. What are you going to do with terabytes of data in terms of sending emails? And oftentimes the answer to that is maybe visualizations. You can pack a lot of data in a visualization. The problem with that is it still requires interpretation. The person looking at the chart needs to understand, even if it's an infographic, sometimes those aren't necessarily, easy for people to decipher. Everybody can understand text. Everybody can understand, short sentences. And so I think that as we're able to start personalizing more content over time and taking that data and turning it into insights that people can really understand without having to interpret it, it really opens up the possibility to make better use of that 99% of data today that's largely going unused.
So Robbie, let me ask you a question from a consumer's perspective, right? So, like I said, I get hundreds and thousands of emails, right? And I get, like most of us, get emails from Groupon, Living Social, and sort of you name it. I still get emails on, hey, here's a massage, when I've never taken a massage. I still get deals on New York City when I live in San Francisco. And these are big companies with a lot of sources. So why does that still happen? I mean, it's a very simple concept, right? Personalization. Or you can go into hyperlocal. Why does that not still happen?
It's still an extremely tough nut to crack.
And why is it so tough?
Primarily because there's so much data, and depending on how they've put you in different demographic buckets will dictate what they're going to send you. Even some of your behavior may be captured as a part of what they're sending you in the future. Ultimately, this is still an extremely immature space. Personalization. It's very difficult. And again, there's not been a lot of technologies to help people get from all of this data to producing an email that's actually relevant to you. Yeah. And so I think that's the space. Again, for me, the progression's been sort of mass content, one size fits all content, hyper-local or more demographic-based content. The next step will be personalization. But again, we're not there yet. And a large reason for that is because there's not really been the tools to date to enable the Groupons of the world to be able to build those kind of solutions.
And not, I didn't mean to be Groupon, Living Social, you name it, a bunch of these guys. And personally, I'm a big Amazon consumer and supporter, and I think they've done one of the most incredible jobs. I think one of the biggest value that Amazon brought was use data and what they call recommendation. And it is so personalized. They don't take any information, but they know who I am, what I like, and every time I'm there, they'll give me the right recommendations. And it just feels like it's a huge opportunity in the email world. It's a simple concept, but there's a huge opportunity to advance that going forward. So Avi, just on the relevancy, let's talk about what you guys are doing, building on top of Chrome, and there's a branding element. And so how do you view sort of companies that you work with? Does that drive awareness? Does that drive conversions? Is it still branding? And by the way, I think it's a great concept because I have clients who are billion-dollar companies who still use Gmail, like standard Gmail as their email ecosystem. So tell me, is that more branding, and how do you think about conversions, and what are some of the results that you guys see there?
So there's a lot of interesting opportunities when it comes to building for Chrome and building for Gmail as opposed to some of the other clients. The benefit with Gmail is they do open up their interface to allow you to really integrate very naturally with their existing feature set. So for those of you out there who may have used Boomerang or Reportive, they do a nice job of kind of living alongside of your content without disrupting the experience. For us on the icons, we've gotten some really nice preliminary data around different types of segments and how that drives actual engagement and conversions with the visual organization relative to just the standard kind of you're in when you're in and they read when they read experience. So for the e-commerce sector, for the Groupons, for the JCPenney's, this is kind of intuitive, but it's nice that the data is starting to prove it out. A lot of our users are finding that even though a subject line may grab them at a certain time when they read it, they can't take any action on it. They are in bed checking their morning messages, they're at work when they can't buy, and they tell us, and what we see is, we're gonna star it, we're gonna archive it, we'll come back to it. And what inevitably happens is they don't, or they do a search for, sofa, and they get all kinds of emails from friends and family, and they can't find it. And the idea is they don't have a lot of patience for even the great content that induced them to open that they want to click through on. So what we found is they view our icons as it's time to shop. I have a couple of minutes, I want to go through all my Groupon, I want to go through all my Nordstroms, all my JCPenney, things like that. And it creates this branded experience that is very intuitive, almost like pulling up an app on your phone when you want to look for content. And what we'd love to do, and we've started to, is partner with folks like what Dan was talking about, where we leverage other technologies to say, now that we have this branded environment, and now that people are going to kind of go to this on a semi-regular basis, just keep updating the content so that you can constantly be moving kind of the old stuff out and delivering the new stuff. So part of it is engagement, and the other thing that's been really interesting that we've heard is it actually builds a better connection with the brand. There's a warmth. So one user told me he gets these Papa John's emails and can't stand them. But when he saw the Papa John's logo, he was like, oh, I like this. This is a brand I care about. Like, I actually want to eat Papa John's pizza. So there's a reason brands invest so much in creating a logo that you identify with. And but as email marketers, you're really restricted just to subject line and timing. So again, just having that visual connection that kind of lives unobtrusively within the inbox really drives engagement for the brands that people like the most.
Got it. Were you going to add something, Erik, there?
Yeah, sorry, I was like jumping out of my chair here when
Yeah.
you were talking about Amazon, because I totally agree with you 100%. And we've actually, there was an article, I think in VentureBeat a couple years ago, that attributed 35% of Amazon sales to the highly targeted, highly personalized recommendations that they have. And I loved what you were saying about how you can see over and over again with brands that do this very well, whether it's Amazon, whether it's the Obama campaign, whatever it is, when you engage your clients through email, when you make it relevant, when you drive that personalization, at Amazon, again, you're talking about 35% of revenue. That's billions of dollars that are being created simply because of intelligent personalization through email. And what you see over and over again is so many other brands, even large, fairly sophisticated ones in a lot of ways, leaving a lot of money on the table because they're either not engaging their customers or they're not engaging them in sort of a one-on-one basis or in a way that actually creates relevant content for them. And that's ultimately, I think, a massive challenge that people need to figure out how to solve more and more. And that's obviously a lot of what SimpleRelevance is doing, is figuring out how do you create that connection the way Amazon has done it, and how do you make it so that men who don't buy spa deals don't get spa deals anymore, right? And,
That's right.
And that same example can then sort of go on across all sorts of different industries.
So another tangent over here is just scale, right? Well, one of the problems across technology, doesn't matter email or internet, is just doing something but doing it at scale.
Yep.
And then the second aspect is, what's the right balance? So here's a very important concept in email is, how many emails can you really send to consumers where it's actually relevant to them, where it's sort of not feel like it's spam? And I'm a consumer who gets a lot of these also. So how do you think about, and it's an open question to you guys, how many emails are enough emails? And they may not be a number, but how do you think about that within the relevancy so you're not sort of bordering on the spamming side but still engaging your consumers?
Yeah, I'll take a first shot at that. Again, if you have a data-centric approach to, not even to say necessarily creating the emails like what we're able to do, but just using data to base decisions around emails, what we found has been successful is sort of variable delivery. That is based on certain events, certain things that happen that you determine in the data that can trigger emails. So, we're going to send an email every Tuesday, or we're going to send an email every, second of the month. Those are more shots in the dark. You're just trying to hope that, your message is going to be relevant and on point to them at that specific point in time, which is also the same point in time that you're sending it to everybody else. If you have data about your user base and you're able to determine, their usage patterns, click patterns, et cetera, then you can actually, maybe based on how they're visiting a website or, information related to which products they're using and certain issues related to those products or new products coming out, you can actually determine, all right, we're going to send, and it's nothing that you set ahead of time, it's more algorithmic based, that you're going to send an email if this certain type of thing occurs in the data. And again, that's not been as prevalent to date, again, because it requires a certain amount of infrastructure to be able to sort of base those decisions off of the data that you have. But I think that's ultimately, again, getting down to the personalized level. The answer is, I don't know. What's right for you is probably different for me in terms of how much is right. But I know that if you can at least make decisions based on data, you have a better chance than saying, well, let's just send me and you the same email every month.
Yeah, we talk to a lot of clients who come to us and say automatically, Dan, I think I'm just sending too many emails. And then we take a look at the types of emails they're sending, and maybe they're only sending one vertical of email or one type of email per day or per week, but the problem is the messaging in every one of those emails is completely irrelevant for the user. So we've seen many times that we can actually increase the number of emails in each of the verticals for a client, but making them more relevant, we can actually even increase deliverability on those emails because the messaging and the content in them is more relevant. So I'd say that there's no magic number, and it's different for every company, and it's different for every vertical of email. It's going to be different for your welcome emails versus your transactional emails versus your drip campaigns, your loyalty, reactivation, et cetera, et cetera. So you really need to be doing, especially if you're looking at figures like revenue per 1,000 emails, threshold testing between the number of emails sent and looking at the increase in churn and figure out where the equilibrium exists.
Just one quick point on that. I have yet to talk to a single customer and where the gating factor is that they're sending too many emails, their unsubscribe rates go to the point where they then decide to start cutting back the number of emails they send. I talk to some who maybe feel like they're sending too many emails. I talk to a ton of clients who don't have time to craft and send more email or figure out how to find different ways to engage with their customers. But you've got to be really far out there on the curve to where the unsubscribe rates that come from sending too much email start to go higher and generate negative return as compared to the additional increased engagement you get by continuing to communicate with your customers.
Yeah,
and it's more than unsubscribe. It could be even open rates, right? For example, sometimes I just ignore them.
Well, exactly. So you can be getting so much noise that you don't even bother opening the email anymore. But what you see more and more is that if I get an email every day or once a week from a brand, I actually tend to be more apt to open it than if I get one once a month. Because if I haven't heard from this brand in a month and they show up in my inbox, that tends to actually decrease engagement on a per email basis.
Yeah, and I think as the tools to manage all of the messages that are coming in get better, users stop to feel like they're being overwhelmed because they at least have a way to deal with it. And to Erik's point, to have these messages come in and be relevant for the user when they want to retrieve them or allow them to engage, even just as a top of mind thing, it still doesn't get to the point where to his point, again, users are going to start unsubscribing in mass, that it's going to hurt just the overall ROI from sending these messages.
So that's a good point. So what you're doing is not only there's a branding element for a marketer, but you're also giving control to the consumer.
Right.
Which is you can go retrieve them when you want, based on the branding, based on the message, what resonates and what time. And that happens. I travel a lot, and there are times when I'm just going through my emails just to say, hey, have I missed something? But I have to go through and I'm thinking about, hey, what was the last thing? I remember I saw something, but I can't find it. So so you're also giving control to a consumer, which is an important aspect of it.
That's right. And I think that, generally email was kind of this open protocol where there's an inbox and a lot of stuff comes in it. And now, what's happening with some of the tools like Outlook Sweep, or with what we're trying to build and other folks like us, is it is this rich environment of curated content that you care about. And one of the biggest insights that came out for us was there's a massive feeling of FOMO, a fear of missing out. We would say to people, why don't you just unsubscribe from messages? And what they would tell us is 99 of these are irrelevant, but I'm really worried that the 100th is going to matter. And so when you can start saying, and at least this is our view, well, if we know that this brand is relevant to you, then they can keep shooting content at you, and when you think it's going to matter, you can check it out, or you can say, I want every 5th to come up into my inbox, or whatever that kind of control that, without manipulating too much of what they have to do, that they can at least curate their inbox and their stream of content to be more relevant for them.
Great. Okay, let's just keep going. Let's go to mobile. Maybe Dan, I'll start with you on mobile. So clearly a different ecosystem, very relevant. We saw the data points. And so just for the audience, what's really important as far as strategy towards the mobile? It's a different form factor, different experience. And how do you think about that? And what's your best advice when you think about mobile and email?
Yeah, absolutely. So, we actually track among all our customers how many emails are open on each type of device among mobile devices versus desktop. And we see similar numbers. We see between 40 and 60% of all emails that are being sent are actually being opened on a mobile device. And what we've also seen is that if you send an email and that email is not mobile friendly, 60% of individuals who open that email are going to click right out of it, and fewer than 1% are ever going to come back. So we've seen a lot of the times that customers will come and say, hey, Dan, I don't know what's going on. My engagement is really suffering. And it turns out their CTA is just below the fold on every single mobile device. So there are some very, very simple things you can do to make sure that you're able to take advantage of these increasing mobile activities instead of suffering from the increases. And one is around design. Spend the 8 hours it takes, get your dev team or your design team to just make sure that email appears in a mobile-friendly format on every mobile device. Very simple. Second, and I touched on this earlier, is making sure you're using real-time optimization to the extent you can. There are several companies now that offer these services to make sure that if it's open on an iPhone or an Android or an iPad or a desktop, you're showing a version of that email that's been optimized for that device and taking them to a landing page that's also been optimized for that device. And again, you can be losing up to 25% of your traffic on open if you're not doing these very simple things. So those are two very easy starting points, and if you guys aren't doing them now, I'm sure when you start, you will see increases in engagement across the board.
Those are two very good points, because I've seen companies talk about mobile, everyone sees where mobile is, but not investing enough in it and creating that personalized experience or towards mobile.
Yeah.
I see more of that happening. But I quite frankly don't see enough investment going on to really think about it as just a different ecosystem.
Yeah, and individuals who check email on a mobile device will check email on that specific device at least 5 times a day. So again, I think Avi was mentioning people are checking email, when they wake up, when they're at the gym, while they're having lunch, watching sitcoms in the evening. But that means that your email is competing with all these other tasks that are going on. So you have to be able to get your point across in that 1 second you have that they scan your email and get that user to understand what you want them to do, or you're going to lose that traffic.
And do you guys see mobile open rates on email increasing even more than where it is right now, or do you see sort of a flattening out?
Yeah, so from the clients we've worked with for a long time, say at least a year or 6 months, we definitely see that there is a definite increase in mobile activity across the board. It's not volatile at all. It's just an increase that's very plain and simple to see when you're looking at open rates among different devices.
Sorry, I was just going to say, so I do see it increasing. I think there's another element of this, though. Dan, you had a great point in terms of they need to go to a mobile optimized landing page. And I think that getting the conversion from the mobile device can oftentimes be more difficult than it is from a PC or even a tablet, just because of the form factor. It's harder to get somebody to put in a credit card into their mobile device, things like that. So where you can have the payment information already stored, you can make sort of the one-click processing a lot easier. I think we still got a long way to go in figuring out if somebody's coming from a mobile device, how do we actually convert them on the sale? Or, on the other hand, if somebody's opening up your email on the way to work, for instance, and you know that they've opened that email but maybe they didn't convert, do you think about sending them a follow-up email when they're in front of their computer, perhaps, and say, here it is again, maybe you get them to convert that time. So I think there's still a long way to go in terms of understanding exactly how mobile affects all these different elements of the ecosystem and optimizing appropriately.
So here's a real-world example. I think in the world of e-commerce, and I know you guys work with e-commerce companies, mobile is actually additive in e-commerce as opposed to cannibalistic within advertising. So what we see also is people do browse, engage on mobile devices, but actually complete the sale on a desktop. And I think there's something to be said with an email ecosystem, which could be additive as long as you close the loop between mobile and desktop.
Exactly. I think you're spot on there.
Okay. Let's just touch upon our last topic, social. So Robbie, how do you think about the social ecosystem, right? And how do you encapsulate what's happening, whether it's Facebook or Twitter or YouTube, within content and within how email is viewed?
Sure. So the way we look at content is actually a little abstracted. We don't think of necessarily creating email content. We think about creating content, and then how do you shape it across the variety of form factors that you need to support, whether that's email, Facebook, Twitter, web, mobile. And again, the nice thing about an automated approach is that you almost get that stuff for free. I'm sure all you folks know that you're creating a piece of content, you're tailoring a message, and now you have to think about each one of those channels. Oftentimes it's a different message. You have to tweak it in some way, so it essentially increases your time spent creating that message and distributing it by 4x or 5x, or however many channels that you're going to support. When we automate content, we will actually do it and provide those multiple form factors so that you can then distribute it via email, Facebook, Twitter, make it available on the web and mobile all simultaneously. And so again, that's another benefit of a data-oriented approach to crafting messages. It's not always the case that you can do every message in a data-centric approach. I thought the Obama campaign has some really interesting potential use cases where even mentioned if you can include numbers related to how much people have spent on the campaign that's really successful. They did it in a very bullet point fashion. You could actually tailor that into 3 or 4 sentences and make it sound like Obama wrote it himself. So that's kind of the state of the art today. And for us, social is just another way to sort of leverage that capability, because now you can do it across all the different formats as opposed to just only thinking about email.
And let me end with you, Avi, and then we'll open up for questions from the floor. So branding you talked about, and do you see sort of your brands closing the loop within what you're doing with other social mediums, or is that still sort of something they're still trying to discover?
No, I mean, we definitely do. Again, we think about the brands as having a brand environment, and I think one way that email can catch up with social platforms in certain ways is social platforms are streams of content. They're Twitter feeds, they're status feeds, they're rich, they're quick, they capture people. And email is still kind of the traditional inbox. And so as we think about the tools that folks like us had, reportive ads, where you're bringing in that additional content and housing it in the area that people are really spending the most time in, but not only are they spending the most time in, but it's the most personalized because they've already shown purchase intent or intent by inviting you in rather than kind of sponsored stuff reaching them. And it's also valuable because, as we all know, it's the highest return. So we definitely think that there's an opportunity to convert around a lot of the content that people are making it and package it within the inbox that's not overwhelming or offensive, but just adds to relevancy and doesn't require you to kind of continue to come up with content for here and content for there and content for there, but it's really, this is the best content, and this is where we want you to see it.
Great. Any questions from the floor?
Yeah, and actually, I wanted to go ahead and ask, this is more of a question for you, Faisal.
Yeah.
As we've seen some companies go public in the space with more of an email platform background and that sort of thing, and we're just kind of watching what's going on from a volatility. What is, in your take, what is the street kind of looking for in terms of how they look at these email companies? Do they just not get it? Is that hey, email's going to die thing kind of out there? What are you seeing from that perspective?
So we actually took exact target public. It wasn't me. It was one of my partners in the software group. There's a really long answer to that, but I'll try and make it really concise. So if you think about our sector, it's innovative, it's disruptive. It's had its highs and lows. So I'll go back to 2007, 2006, where there weren't a lot of IPOs, and there were big companies being built in the private realm. There was way too much private capital, so that was one thing. The expectations that were built up were really, really high. And the third thing was there was a real disconnect between the private markets and the public markets, right? And that's a very important aspect to think about. When you look at the value creation that's happened, and this is email and the sector as a whole, it's astounding. But the volatility is even more astounding. So as people, there's a risk-reward element when Wall Street thinks about this. And the biggest mistake that could have happened, and that happened in front of our eyes, was a big gap between expectation and performance. So when companies went out, and this is a broad group of companies, and I'll make it broad as far as Groupon and Pandora, and there's a bunch of other companies. The expectation that was set up in front of Wall Street investors was up there, and the performance was here. And when you have an IPO, when you have a young company, I don't care if it's a couple of billion, 2, 3 billion, 5 billion, 10 billion, it is so important to manage that process, and it's a big step forward. And what we saw was that all of these companies just got hammered. So it wasn't as much to do with email. It was more with people bought into what the business model was. I don't think people were as, didn't have complete insight into where the future was going, but there was a leap of faith. But as soon as the performance sort of hit, and this is first quarter, second quarter, Wall Street just didn't like it, and they reacted in pretty harsh fashion. So now you can say the pendulum has swung too far the other way. But that's just how Wall Street is.
Hey, I'm Vivek Sharma from Movable Link, and Robbie and I actually worked together at Cisco Systems like 13 years ago, and I don't think anyone would have predicted we would be innovating in email 13 years later. But kind of a question I have about looking at data personalization. Amazon sort of held up as the great sort of the canonical example of understanding your behavior and showing you things that are relevant based on past purchasing behavior. I'm wondering if that's limiting in some ways. I've bought an espresso machine on Amazon about a year ago, and everything that I see in terms of recommendations are, hey, get a filter for that, get some coffee beans, get something sort of related to that. And are we losing this opportunity to surprise and delight our customers with something unexpected based on maybe I wouldn't have gotten a massage or a cruise around Manhattan, but I wonder if social data or things like Pinterest can help sort of with that discovery element.
No, it's a great question, and I think Erik could probably add a lot to this because he works right in this space as well. I think there's actually been some e-commerce examples where they do try to delight you with sort of surprise recommendations that, based on purchasing habits of people like you that have also purchased an espresso machine, that 25% of those people have also purchased a spa treatment at a local spa, right? They don't. The problem with that though is it's a risk. Right, it rarely is the case that somebody that bought an espresso machine, also 90% of those people bought something else. It's more like maybe 25% of people, and so I think oftentimes those big brands tend to be a little more risk adverse in trying to go out on a limb as far as that goes and say, let's offer up some other things, even though I think you're absolutely right that it could actually lead to some interesting potential opportunities. The risk for them is that they'll think, or people will perceive them as getting offers for things that they have no interest in, and then maybe they're going to unsubscribe or stop being a user. So, I don't have a great answer. I think it's sort of a delicate balancing act, but I do think there's a lot more that could be done with, targeting, even just sort of browsing and intent behavior. I think there's a lot more that could be done there than you're just scratching the surface related to, when people are browsing around a site. All that data is being tracked, and very rarely are brands actually taking that data and incorporating it into decision making around what kind of messages am I going to deliver via email.
Yeah, just to add to that, Robbie, totally agree with what you said. I think, so you think of these algorithms, it's really what variables are you trying to optimize on? And so if you're trying to optimize on pure conversion and revenue generated per conversion, then it can drive you to a very narrow subset of products that you actually recommend to people. It can actually be pretty difficult to beat the top 5 or 10 selling products. Amazon's actually talked about this before with their Harry Potter problem, where at some point everybody from Amazon was essentially being recommended Harry Potter, and they had to sort of go in and manually start kind of pulling those things out. And so, as you're tweaking the mathematics and the algorithmics, and I'd be happy to sort of have a more detailed offline conversation about this, because it's something that's absolutely fascinating when you really drill into it. You're trying to understand, at least what we try and drive in as we work with a lot of our clients, is you can't solely optimize on one metric to the exclusion of all else, even if that metric is something like revenue per email, which is a great metric to drive up. However, you've got to start looking at things like cross-selling opportunities. How do you expose your customer to a wider variety of merchandise? How do you create a story around that merchandise as to why they might be interested in it? So if you're going to show them that thing that 25% of people convert on, explain to them, hey, lots of people like you tend to also like this, right? And so as you can start to sort of drive those tools in so that you're not always showing them the exact same thing, that can generate more value, I think, strategically and longer term. However, you're not always necessarily going to see an optimized uplift on day one from doing something like that. And you've got to be willing to be a little bit more strategic with your marketing as opposed to just tactical.
Wonderful. I know that there are a couple of other questions, but we are running a few minutes behind. So I want to give a quick, enthusiastic thank you to our panelists here. You can go ahead and just step off the side. I'm going to ask our next panelist to start moving up. So the folks from the Big Data panel, which we've already given a few shout outs to. So Tom Burke from Tower Data will be moderating this panel. Tom, if you could come up.